Okay, so in continuation of working our way through having hydraulic on our system, the TI only has one hydraulic reservoir, and that is for the brakes. However, when you're putting in a hydraulic clutch, you need to have another reservoir. I'm already kind of convinced that I'm going to relocate the fuse box inside the car just to kind of clear up some of the space. But I didn't want to add another reservoir. So what we're going to do? This. This is for a Range Rover or Land Rover, like the 109 series. And it is two reservoirs inside of one. Not just two nipples. There is a cylinder within a cylinder. So you have a dedicated reservoir for your clutch and a dedicated reservoir for the brakes. More importantly, it looks pretty correct. I don't want the car to have modern look and feel to it. We'll have advanced technology on this car, but it's going to be hidden. It's kind of the way I do my thing. So this little guy right here, which is diameter-wise the same as this will repurpose this bracket. This will sit right here instead, like such. This will be gone. We'll put it inside the car because after all, the only wires coming this way are for the headlights and turn signals. So it's a relatively simple relocation. So this will go under the dash. All this will be cleared out. That's going to be cleared out because I need as much space as I can for our fuel injection system. So we're just going to overall clean up the interior of the engine bay a little bit, not a lot. Excessive holes will get welded up, and that'll be about it. Okay, so this is our really well-made replacement front clip. If you're needing one of these, we got ours from Centerline, so they can get them. This one's a really nice one. Anyhow, so one of the bigger clues, if you're looking to buy a Supra or a TI, look right here in the front, right where the fender meets this. You should see the expansion joint right here. That's just where the two metals are folded in. In our car, clue number one to let you know that it was heavily damaged, other than the obvious massive amounts of body filler, was that you couldn't see this joint on either side of the car. That's because the body filler had caked it all over. So if the car has been relatively honest and hasn't been punched in the front, you should be able to see those. So this fender doesn't have this folded edge right here, this piece. So we're going to recreate that on the car, but we're going to match it to this with the shrinker structure. That way, when I weld it onto the fender will already have the appropriate geometry to meet up against this. So I'm going to start doing that next, see what that's all about. Okay, so these front aprons aren't exactly exact from the factory because they come from what is now considered a rubber mold instead of the old steel molds that the original ones would have came from. What does that mean? It means executions on angles like this aren't exactly tight and right angled. So in order for this to sit here perfectly flat against this, I need to shape this and sharpen it a little bit. It's not a big deal, it only takes a few minutes. There we go. Okay, I'm going to show you what it looks like now. See that this execution is tightly butted up against it, which will make for a much cleaner look. Now it's time to weld this onto the fender. Okay, so this area right here was heavily distorted, so by creating the exact angle, we're able to mimic what it should be like. The clamps are holding the angled metal in place. Now we will weld this, seal the backside so no rust can get behind it later, and then that way this will butt up against our new front clip much cleaner. file to find the high spots so you can work those down. It's a slow process, but it's essentially the most ideal way to make sure you're getting the metal right where it should be. So yesterday we had taken all this out, taken this ridiculous foam out, and I made a patch panel down here for the new panel to bond to. Now what you see here is a spray version of Pour 15. It's fairly expensive for one can, so it's not something I would buy if you had a lot to do. Anyhow, so the point is this area has been treated and now it's time to weld that on. Unfortunately, we have more on the other side to do of the same thing, and I suspect it's going to be a little worse for wear than this side was. Anyway, so I'm going to weld this up, and the only other damage on this car that we have to take care of is more or less is on the rockers. So the front clip being replaced, these, and exterior rocker repairs, and that's about all I'm going to do when it comes to metal repairs on this. Now normally, in almost every case, we always take these cars all the way down to bare metal, and we treat the metal. The reason we do that is because this has always been known as somewhat contaminated metal from the get-go, because it was bought from old Russian military stock, and it wasn't exactly the best stuff. Anyhow, so what we normally do is we normally blast these things, then we put an acid etching primer on there, and then we bring the cars back to life from there. In this case, we're not going to do that, because we're on a fairly strict timeline. Now we're just going to sand this down, basically use all this paint that's already on this as a leveler, and then after that go back to sealing up and coloring it again. Okay, so this panel is completely in, and this gray stuff you see is called all metal. It is an aluminum fine shavings, if you will, mixed with some resins, and it's ideal for engine bays and to apply over welds. The reason that is because it really kind of presses itself into the weld and around it, and it's a nice leveling agent. But effectively, anytime you're welding something, once you grind those welds, you should probably consider using an all-metal product instead of body filler. Body filler and everything else can go over the top of this, but this is ideal to start with as a foundation. Now, as far as welds go, you never want to weld down to the surface to try to make it flat, because you're only going to make that weld area very fatigued, and it's going to be most likely cracking in the future. So devices like this is a weld trimmer. And what this device does is it has a regulated height. You can adjust the height of how much you're cutting off when you're welding or when you're grinding the weld. Anyway, one of these types of devices is ideal because you can shave the weld and leave just an ever so slight crowning, which will ensure that the weld isn't too thin and the metal won't break later. But these are not cheap. If you find one on an auction site, great. But brand new, these things are almost $1,000. So you certainly wouldn't want to buy one just for a weekend project. Alright, so the fun never stops. This is now effectively the driver's side. And the same type of process was done. Some kind of expanding foam, which actually, because it traps some moisture in, makes the situation worse for later date repairs. Yeah.
All right, it's another Saturday morning. I'm in with Dazzling Darren, trying to fix Quasi in readiness for the spring. So today we've pulled out the steering box and the steering column, and I'm generally tidying up the engine bay. The plan is to pull the wiring through, finish off cleaning in here, grind it all down, weld up some of the holes in here so we can make it good to paint. And that's it for this morning. It's very, very dirty. Dirty, dirty, dirty. So now we are cleaning the engine bay, ready for getting it dirty again. So there you have it, another wasted Saturday.
Alright, so as Dave has already said, it's the end of another Saturday. The other side is done, and this side had the same thing, expanded foam in it, and it was rusty, and a good portion of this had to be replaced, and now it's in pour 15. We'll let it dry for the rest of the weekend, and sometime next week we'll put on the appropriate panel. But this is not an uncommon repair on these Supers and TIs. This area, right at the rear door, the entire archway, or as it's called, the dog legs, these tend to be subject to a whole lot of rust issues. We're lucky enough that this is just limited to this, and some little spots in the rockers that need to be addressed, and that's about it. So what would you rather have? A car that you can obviously see the rust issues, or one that somebody has loaded up with a bunch of body filler to hide the damage? If you look closely enough, you can see where the damage generally is, and more importantly, you can really see where the body filler is. I would take this over the other every time. This is why. This is allowing moisture to get out. So it kind of really limits how much more damage can possibly happen to within a degree. Whereas if this was all filled in with body filler, whatever caused the damage is still continuing. Rust does not go dormant. So effectively the rust will continue to eat away. So in reality, if you're looking to buy one of these, and you're looking at one that has a lot of body filler on it, but it looks pretty clean, you have another one that has some rust on it you can obviously see, but very little body filler, go for this car first. In the long run, you'll always be far, far better off. Reason is this, you can see what you need to repair, the damage is reasonably contained. You don't know how bad the damage is on a car full of body filler until you get it all off. And that's labor intensive. Okay, so it may be a little difficult to see, but what we've done is we went back in here just before we're getting ready to treat the areas and paint things. We're going to start painting the engine bay next weekend, so the next time you see this car, the engine bay will be painted. Anyhow, so what we did is we went and welded up all the holes that were clearly meant for other things, and the reason we did that is because we're reconfiguring the engine bay. I don't need the locations for the coil because we're not running a coil, we're running a distributorless setup on the motor. So I didn't want to have all these extra holes. So we're going to go back and we're going to put in a product called all metal, which is basically a resin with aluminum filings, if you will. It's meant for engine bays, it's meant for welds. You saw us use it in the rear quarter panels. Anyhow, so we're going to put that on over everything. We're going to smooth it all out. And that's going to be that. The engine bay is going to be effectively very, very clean looking, very few holes in it. So when we start to lay out the internals, the engine and the items that need to be supporting the engine, we're going to pick and choose where they go. And ideally what we're going to do is have a engine bay that's relatively clean with very few, very few holes, very few accessories hanging in there. The fuse block will be relocated to inside the engine bay. A few other items won't be in here anymore. And so the overall intent is to have an engine bay that is, one, very serviceable, because there's not going to be a lot of things in my way, and two, something that's fairly clean and simple to look at. I don't necessarily care for an engine bay that's got a lot of stuff inside. And this is going to be one of those end results. Getting there. When you're in this business long enough, at some point in time you can't help but to become somewhat of a parts hoarder. The reason that is because production parts are hit and miss. Sometimes they're available, sometimes they're not. But regardless of that, you end up hanging on to what you have sometimes, whether it seems like it's insignificant or such a trivial piece, because oftentimes it is better or easier to grab that used piece you have versus trying to buy a new one. Oftentimes new ones, quality isn't very good, or the failure rate's fairly high depending on what the part is. But in this case, that's not. Centerline has done a pretty doggone good job of sourcing parts that are high quality standard, and that is more relevant now than ever. I can't tell you how many times we have seen reproduction parts come in, they don't fit, they're not even close to what they're supposed to be, made out of poor steel, inaccurate, the list goes on. Anyhow, when we needed the front clip, they were able to source one, and as part of the collection they're building up and having an inventory. This front clip for Quasi turned out to be really, really good. The frame structure is nice, the welds are really clean, and the fitment's pretty doggone perfect. But one thing about this piece, for whatever reason, it doesn't have the radiator core supports up top, just the meaning the bolt holes. So we had to make some. Basically what we did is we took a nut, welded it to a washer, put it on a bolt so we have something to hold on to, slightly drilled out the holes over there, and it's ready to go. It's just one of those minor things you want to identify before you actually get into the point of painting these. Okay, this is our computer that we can generate any formula for any paint code that is known to man on that mixing bank. And so now we're at the point where we're going to mix up the color for the engine bay of Quasi. Now we still have to do some work in the engine bay. All the welding has been done. We need to finish up the inside, make it a little bit smoother, hide some of the welding activity that we did, and just make it an overall more appealing experience. But we need to go ahead and start mixing some color. So I'm going to mix up a little bit of paint in a single stage setup so that when we're ready to paint that engine bay, hopefully later in the week, that we're ready to go. Now we're going to shoot this in a single stage, and I'm most likely going to shoot the rest of the car in a single stage because quite honestly that's how it came, and there is an appearance difference between a two-stage paint and a single stage paint. It doesn't mean single stage is an inferior product. That's kind of an ignorant thought that a lot of folks seem to have. It's a matter of what the car originally represented itself with. So it's rare that shops have single stage paint anymore, and we don't have single stage paint. But what we do have is all the toners in the world and something called a single stage converter. It's something that Sickens produces, and it's really kind of clever. It basically makes it to where any paint that we want to mix up, we can make it in a single stage, so if that car originally came that way, we can replicate it. Anyhow, so I'm mixing up the paint now to create our AR301, which is what our car originally came in. And so let's get started. Alright, and I just sent the formula over to the scales. And now all I have to do is follow the directions, pour into our cup how much paint we need. Okay, so our first pull is we need 168 grams of white high strength. And that scale will count down. It says 168.3 right now. And that'll go to 0. When we get 0, that's when you stop pouring. Okay. Some of these toners can be as little as 1/10 of a gram, and it influences the paint a lot. So you have to be very careful what you're doing. 168 to 120. See, now I need to put 6/10 of a gram of yellow in. Watch how little this is. 1 drop. That was 2/10 of a gram. 2 drops. That is down to 0.2 of a gram. Alright, so time to introduce some blue. And again, only 6/10 of a gram. 2 drops. 3 drops. 4 drops. Okay, now 0.8 of a gram of black. Now it's time for single stage converter. 171 grams. So that, once shaken, is going to turn into that. Okay, so we mix up the paint, and you never trust the outside color, especially if a car's been painted 2, 3, or 4 times, something like that. So you always try to find the paint that hasn't been disturbed since the get-go. We don't think the door's been touched. However, we do see a transitional color here, and there's some spray over here from primer from when this car was painted many times before. So here's the paint we mixed up, and now I'm going to just do a little dab, if you will, and see how it matches up. And it may be difficult for you to see, but that transition from that color to that color is really nice. We have to count for the fact that paint oxidizes over time, and so it's always going to have a slightly different shading to it. However, when this paint dries, that is going to be an incredibly close match to that. So I would say that's a win. So now, seeing how Davey has gotten the engine bay ready to go, we just need to put some all metal in there, a little bit of primer, light scuffing, and then we're ready to paint the engine bay.